We begin this hour with President Trump's week that went from bad to worse as the stinging losses and embarrassing setbacks piled up. Congress nearly unanimously rejected his effort to stop the bill to release the Epstein files after he reversed course to support the bill amid mass Republican defections. He signed it into law Wednesday. Then he suffered a major blow on his redistricting Hail Mary as a federal court in Texas blocked a new Republican-friendly congressional map. Although Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito temporarily restored the new map for at least a few days while the high court weighs whether to allow it for the 2026 midterms. Add to that this week's devastating polls showing the president underwater with voters on key issues. A Fox News poll showed that just 41% of voters approve of the job he's doing. And that when it comes to the economy, a top concern for voters in recent elections, just 38% approve of his handling of the issue. While his economic policies are driving away voters with the growing affordability crisis top of mind, his opposition to some of his core Make America Great Again policies led to a stunning rift in the so-called MAGA coalition. Last night, Republican Congresswoman and former Trump ally Marjorie Taylor Greene announced she'll resign from Congress and leave office on January 5th, nearly a full year before the end of her term. It comes after Greene notably broke with President Trump over the Epstein files, which she joined Democrats in fighting to make public. In a video announcing her resignation last night, Congresswoman Greene made clear that the Epstein files were a key factor in her decision.
Standing up for American women who were raped at 14 years old, trafficked and used by rich, powerful men should not result in me being called a traitor and threatened by the President of the United States.
Okay, so here's a situation that almost never happens. A federal judge looks at the President of the United States and says, you have 48 hours to testify, or I'm holding you in contempt of court. Not a request, not a suggestion, an order with a deadline and consequences if you don't comply. That's exactly what just happened. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg issued a dramatic order requiring Donald Trump and senior administration officials to provide sworn testimony or risk immediate contempt of court proceedings. The judge set a 48-hour deadline, and he made crystal clear that noncompliance will prompt sanctions, including fines or criminal contempt charges. This is unprecedented. This is a federal judge putting a sitting president on the clock and threatening him with contempt if he doesn't testify. And Trump has a choice to make. Does he comply? Does he show up and testify under oath? Or does he defy the court and face the consequences? But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
I don't know if I was changed, but I was changed for good. Okay, but actually, Allie, you've been on the Hill all week. Were we expecting this? I mean, we knew their relationship had gone south and that there was a rift going on, but we were not expecting a resignation.
No, we weren't expecting a resignation. And I think the most stunning thing in the way that I'm trying to metabolize this going forward is we heard Marjorie Taylor Greene this week. I was at the press conference with the Epstein survivors, and she was asked about the impact of that legislation. She says the fact that this was a fight after people waited for hours at rallies to see him, they trudged through snow, they got out the vote for him, they stood by and supported him, they fought for him. And to see this be a fight, she said, it's tearing the party apart. And I had never heard her speak that way, even as they were having their initial rift, which, yes, was over the Epstein files, but was also over the Affordable Care Act and cost of living and the way that her kids' premiums were going up. And the way that she felt like if it's happening to them, it's definitely happening across the country. I had also had some conversations with folks who know her district, are in her district, know Georgia politics, and they were like, she's going to be fine. People love her here. And I think that people can hold space, to carry a wicked metaphor, for the idea that they support their member of Congress, even if they are mad, happy, whatever, with the president or Congress writ large as an apparatus, right? They have a personal tether that I've seen on display, Democrat and Republican, right? So for Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think it was less of that.
We're talking about Judge Boasberg stating explicitly that he will move promptly on contempt proceedings if Trump or his designated officials do not appear in court or submit sworn written declarations by the set deadline. That's not vague language. That's a judge saying, I've given you a deadline, and if you miss it, I'm holding you in contempt immediately. No more delays, no more excuses. You have 48 hours, and then there are consequences. Real consequences. Not just political fallout, legal consequences. Contempt of court can result in fines, can result in imprisonment, can result in a judge ordering U.S. Marshals to take you into custody until you agree to comply. And Judge Boasberg is threatening exactly that against President Trump. The order comes after extensive hearings and a ruling that found probable cause for criminal contempt against Trump officials for defying emergency deportation directives. So this isn't coming out of nowhere. The judge has been watching Trump's team ignore court orders, watching them defy judicial authority, and the judge has had enough. Found probable cause that Trump officials committed criminal contempt. That's a preliminary finding that they willfully violated court orders, and now the judge is giving them one last chance, 48 hours to testify or face contempt charges. That's the ultimatum. The court emphasized urgency and accountability. Because here's what happened. Judge Boasberg issued orders related to deportation cases, told the administration they had to follow certain procedures, had to respect certain rights, and according to the judge's findings, Trump's team ignored those orders. They conducted deportations anyway. They disregarded the court's directives, and that's contempt. That's willful disobedience of a court order, and judges take that extremely seriously. Because if government officials can just ignore court orders, if they can disobey judges with no consequences, the entire judicial system breaks down. Courts lose their authority, and we don't have rule of law anymore. We have rule of whoever has the most power. So Judge Boasberg is enforcing judicial authority, and he's doing it with a hard deadline and serious threats. Failure to comply may lead to escalating penalties, including monetary sanctions and possible imprisonment for willful disregard of the court's directives. That's the judge's language. Possible imprisonment for willfully disregarding court directives. That means if Trump or his officials deliberately choose not to testify, if they defy this order, they could go to jail. The judge has that authority, and he's threatening to use it. This is a rare move, reflecting what the judge in an earlier ruling called shocking executive branch conduct. The judge looked at what Trump's team did and said, "This is shocking. This is so far beyond normal that I have to take extraordinary action." And that action is a 48-hour deadline to testify or face contempt. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, finally a judge is standing up to Trump's defiance of court orders. Finally, someone is threatening real consequences. You've watched Trump ignore subpoenas. You've watched his administration defy court rulings. You've watched him act like judicial authority doesn't apply to him. And you've been waiting for a judge to say enough, to draw a line, to threaten contempt charges if Trump doesn't comply. And Judge Boasberg just did exactly that, with a specific deadline, with explicit threats of imprisonment. This feels like accountability, like the system working, like a judge enforcing the law, even against a sitting president. But Trump supporters are absolutely furious. They see this as judicial overreach, as an unelected judge trying to force the president to do something. They think the judge is exceeding his authority, that he's trying to interfere with executive branch functions, that he's part of the resistance or the deep state trying to undermine Trump's presidency. And they're worried about the precedent. If judges can order presidents to testify on 48 hours notice with threats of contempt, what power does the executive branch actually have? Where's the separation of powers? How can a president govern if judges can constantly haul him into court? But here's the reality. Courts have authority to enforce their orders. When a judge issues a ruling, everyone has to follow it, including the president, including administration officials. That's how the system works. That's the rule of law. And if you defy court orders, judges can hold you in contempt. That applies to everyone. Presidents aren't exempt. They don't get special treatment where they can just ignore judicial orders they don't like. So Judge Boasberg isn't overstepping. He's doing his job. He issued orders. Those orders were allegedly ignored, and now he's enforcing compliance with threats of contempt. That's exactly what judges are supposed to do when their authority is challenged. The case involves ongoing tension between the judiciary and executive branch powers. This is fundamentally about whether courts can check executive action, whether judges can tell the president he has to follow certain procedures or respect certain rights. Trump's position has consistently been that he has broad executive authority, especially on immigration, that judges shouldn't interfere with executive decisions about deportations. But judges have ruled that even on immigration, even on executive authority, there are limits. There are constitutional rights that have to be respected, and courts have authority to enforce those limits. So this isn't just about one deportation case. This is about fundamental questions of separation of powers and judicial authority over the executive branch. So stick with me, because we need to break down exactly what Judge Boasberg ordered, what happens if Trump doesn't comply, and what this confrontation means for presidential accountability. This is a historic moment in the battle between courts and the executive branch. All right, let's dive into the specifics of what's happening here, because this case is more complex than just a judge ordering Trump to testify. We need to understand the underlying case, what court orders Trump allegedly defied, and why Judge Boasberg is taking such aggressive action. So let's start with the deportation case that led to this contempt threat. The case involves deportations to El Salvador. Specifically, Trump's administration used something called the Alien Enemies Act to conduct deportations, and they apparently flew migrants to El Salvador, allegedly to a prison, under circumstances that Judge Boasberg found deeply problematic. The judge had issued orders about how these deportations should be conducted, what procedures had to be followed, what rights the people being deported had, and according to the judge's findings, the Trump administration disregarded those orders. They conducted the deportations anyway, without following the procedures the judge mandated. Judge Boasberg didn't just issue a finding that the orders were violated. He found probable cause for criminal contempt. That's significant. Probable cause means the judge thinks there's reasonable grounds to believe a crime was committed, and criminal contempt is a crime. It's willful disobedience of a court order. It's not just accidentally failing to comply. It's deliberately, knowingly defying a court's authority. And Judge Boasberg looked at the evidence and said, yeah, there's probable cause to believe Trump officials criminally defied my orders. That's a serious finding. It means the judge thinks this wasn't just a bureaucratic mix-up or a good faith disagreement about what the orders required. This was deliberate defiance. The judge used the phrase shocking executive branch conduct in one of his earlier rulings. That's strong language for a federal judge. Judges usually use measured, careful language. They avoid inflammatory rhetoric. But Judge Boasberg looked at what happened and called it shocking. That tells you how far beyond normal the judge thinks this conduct was. What made it shocking? Well, based on the court's findings, the administration apparently conducted deportations that violated people's constitutional rights. They allegedly flew people to El Salvador to a prison without proper legal process, without following the procedures courts had mandated to protect people's rights. And they did it in defiance of court orders that explicitly told them not to do this. That combination, violating rights while defying court orders, is what the judge found shocking. Now let's talk about the 48-hour deadline and what it actually requires. Judge Boasberg is ordering Trump and senior administration officials to either appear in court to provide sworn testimony or submit sworn written declarations by the deadline. So they have options. They can show up in person and testify. That would mean answering questions under oath in front of the judge, or they can submit written sworn statements explaining what happened and why. Either way, they're under oath, which means lying is perjury. Giving false statements to a federal court is a crime. So whatever Trump or his officials say, they have to be truthful, and they have 48 hours to do it. That's an incredibly short deadline. Most court orders give weeks or months for compliance, but Judge Boasberg is giving 48 hours. That tells you how urgent he thinks this is, how important it is that he gets answers immediately. What happens if Trump doesn't comply? Judge Boasberg said he will move promptly on contempt proceedings. That means if the deadline passes and Trump hasn't testified or submitted sworn statements, the judge will immediately initiate contempt proceedings. He won't wait. He won't give more time. He'll act. And contempt proceedings can result in serious consequences. For civil contempt, judges can impose coercive measures, like fining someone $1,000 a day until they comply, or ordering them held in custody until they agree to testify. The idea is to compel compliance. For criminal contempt, which is what the judge found probable cause for here, the consequences are even more serious. Criminal contempt is punished after the fact for past disobedience, and it can result in fines and imprisonment. The judge can sentence someone to jail time for willfully defying court orders, and that applies even to presidents and high-ranking officials. Would Judge Boasberg actually order Trump in prison for contempt? That's the big question everyone's asking. We've never seen a sitting president jailed for contempt. It would be unprecedented. It would create a massive constitutional and political crisis. But Judge Boasberg's language suggests he's prepared to do it if necessary. He's found probable cause for criminal contempt. He's given a hard deadline. He's explicitly threatened imprisonment for willful disregard. Those aren't idle threats. Those are a judge preparing to take serious action. Whether he actually follows through, if Trump defies him, we don't know. But the fact that he's threatening it at all is extraordinary. It shows this judge thinks the conduct was serious enough to warrant the most aggressive judicial response. Let's talk about the legal basis for the judge's authority here. Can a judge really order a sitting president to testify on such short notice with threats of contempt? The answer is yes, with some caveats. Courts have authority to enforce their orders. When a court issues a ruling, it can compel compliance through contempt powers. That's fundamental to judicial authority. Without the ability to enforce orders, courts would be advisory bodies with no real power. So judges absolutely can hold people in contempt for defying orders. Does that include presidents? That's where it gets complicated. Presidents have some protections and privileges. Executive privilege can shield certain presidential communications. Presidential immunity might protect certain actions, but courts have held that presidents aren't entirely above the law. Nixon, v. United States, established that presidents have to comply with subpoenas in criminal cases. Clinton v. Jones held that presidents can be sued in civil cases while in office. So there's precedent for presidents having to respond to judicial authority. The specific context here matters too. This isn't about Trump's personal conduct or private matters. This is about the executive branch allegedly defying court orders related to government action, deportations conducted by federal officials. Those officials work for the president. They were allegedly following presidential policies or directions, but when courts issue orders about how deportations must be conducted, everyone has to follow those orders, including executive branch officials, including the president, if he's directing or approving the conduct. So Judge Boasberg has a strong legal basis for ordering testimony and threatening contempt. Trump can try to assert privileges or immunities, but given that this involves alleged defiance of court orders, those defenses probably won't work. The political implications of this confrontation are enormous. We're watching a real-time battle between the judiciary and the executive branch. Judge Boasberg represents judicial authority, Trump represents executive power, and they're in direct conflict over whether Trump's administration has to follow court orders. If Trump complies, if he testifies or provides written statements, that's a win for judicial authority. It establishes that presidents can't ignore court orders, that judicial oversight of the executive branch is real and enforceable. But if Trump defies the order, if he refuses to comply and faces contempt charges, that creates a different kind of precedent. It tests whether courts can actually enforce their authority against a defiant president. Can Judge Boasberg really hold Trump in contempt? Can he impose sanctions or even order imprisonment? We might be about to find out. Trump's legal team is probably scrambling right now. They have 48 hours to figure out their response. Do they advise Trump to comply, to testify, or submit written statements? That's the legally safe option. It avoids contempt charges, but it requires Trump to answer questions under oath about potentially problematic deportation policies. And anything Trump says can be used in other proceedings, can become evidence in civil or criminal cases. So compliance has risks. Or do they advise Trump to defy the order, to refuse to testify and force the judge to act? That's a huge gamble. If the judge follows through on contempt threats, Trump could face serious legal consequences. But if the judge backs down, if he doesn't actually impose contempt sanctions, Trump wins. He shows that courts can threaten all they want, but can't actually enforce their orders against the president. It's a high-stakes game of chicken between Trump and Judge Boasberg. The case also highlights broader issues about immigration enforcement and executive authority. Trump has taken aggressive positions on immigration. He's claimed broad executive power to conduct deportations, to use emergency authorities like the Alien Enemies Act, to act quickly without extensive legal process. Courts have pushed back. They've said even on immigration, people have constitutional rights, due process rights, rights to challenge deportations, and courts have authority to ensure those rights are protected. This case is an example of that conflict. Trump's administration allegedly conducted deportations in ways the court found violated rights and defied judicial orders, and now the court is trying to enforce accountability. It's the separation of powers in action, courts checking executive overreach. Legal experts are watching this case closely because it could set important precedent. If Judge Boasberg successfully enforces contempt against Trump or his officials, that establishes that courts can hold even the highest executive branch officials accountable for defying orders. That's crucial for maintaining judicial authority. But if Trump successfully defies the order without facing real consequences, that establishes that executive branch officials can ignore courts when they think executive power justifies it. That would be a massive blow to judicial authority and the rule of law. So the stakes here go way beyond this one deportation case. This is about whether courts can check executive power, whether the judiciary is a co-equal branch or just an advisory body that the executive can ignore. The 48-hour deadline is also interesting from a strategic standpoint. Why such a short time frame? Judge Boasberg could have given weeks for compliance, but he chose 48 hours. That suggests he doesn't want to give Trump time to appeal or find procedural ways to delay. He wants an answer now. Either you comply or you're in contempt. No drawn out legal battles, no appeals that take months. just a binary choice with immediate consequences. That's aggressive judicial action, and it shows Judge Boasberg is serious about enforcing his authority. He's not going to let this drag on while Trump's lawyers file motion after motion to delay. He wants resolution immediately. Okay, let's break this down into the key points you need to understand about this judicial order and what's at stake. Point number one, what Judge Boasberg actually ordered and the deadline. Trump and senior administration officials have 48 hours to either appear in court to provide sworn testimony or submit sworn written declarations about deportation policies and whether they defied court orders. That's a hard deadline with no wiggle room. Either comply within 48 hours or face immediate contempt proceedings. The judge made clear he will move promptly if the deadline is missed. That means contempt charges happen immediately. No delays, no grace period, just direct consequences. Point number two, why the judge is taking such aggressive action. Judge Boasberg found probable cause that Trump officials committed criminal contempt by defying emergency deportation orders. The judge called the conduct shocking executive branch behavior. That's extraordinary language from a federal judge. It means the alleged defiance of court orders was so egregious that extraordinary judicial action is warranted. The judge isn't just concerned about one procedural violation. He's concerned about systematic defiance of judicial authority by the executive branch, and he's responding with the most aggressive tool available, contempt charges with possible imprisonment. Point number three, the potential consequences if Trump doesn't comply. Criminal contempt can result in fines and imprisonment. Judge Boasberg explicitly threatened possible imprisonment for willful disregard of court directives. That means if Trump or his officials deliberately choose not to comply, they could be jailed. The judge has authority to order U.S. Marshals to take them into custody, to hold them until they agree to comply, or to sentence them to jail time as punishment for past defiance. Those aren't theoretical threats. Federal judges have contempt power and can use it, and this judge seems prepared to do so. Point number four, the broader implications for separation of powers. This confrontation is fundamentally about whether courts can check executive authority, whether judges can tell the president and his administration they have to follow certain procedures and respect certain rights. Trump's position has been that he has broad executive power, especially on immigration, and courts shouldn't interfere. But judges say even executive power has constitutional limits, and courts have authority to enforce those limits. This case will test whether that judicial authority is real or just theoretical. If courts can't actually enforce orders against defiant presidents, then separation of powers is broken. Point number five, why the 48-hour deadline matters. Most court orders give weeks or months for compliance, but Judge Boasberg gave 48 hours. That's deliberately aggressive. It prevents Trump from using procedural delays and endless appeals to avoid compliance. It forces an immediate choice: comply or face contempt. No time for drawn-out legal battles. Just a binary decision with immediate consequences. That shows how seriously the judge takes this defiance and how determined he is to enforce judicial authority. So what actually happens in the next 48 hours? What are Trump's realistic options? Option 1. Comply fully. Trump or his designated officials appear in court or submit sworn written statements explaining what happened with the deportations and why. This avoids contempt charges, but it requires testifying under oath about potentially problematic policies, and anything they say can be used in other cases, so compliance has risks, but it's the legally safe option. Option 2. Partial compliance. Maybe Trump submits written statements, but asserts executive privilege for certain information, claims he can't answer some questions because they involve presidential decision-making. This might avoid contempt if the judge accepts the privilege claims, but if the judge rejects them and finds the privilege assertions improper, it could make things worse. Option 3. Complete defiance. Trump refuses to comply at all. Doesn't testify? Doesn't submit statements? Dares the judge to follow through on contempt threats? This is the highest risk option. If the judge follows through, Trump faces contempt charges. But if the judge backs down, Trump wins the confrontation. My prediction? Trump tries option 2. Partial compliance with lots of privilege assertions. He submits some written statement that provides minimal information while claiming most details are protected by executive privilege. That forces Judge Boasberg to rule on whether the privilege claims are valid, and it gives Trump something to appeal if the judge rejects the privilege claims and finds him in contempt. It's the middle ground strategy that tries to avoid complete defiance while still not fully cooperating. But Judge Boasberg might not accept that, might say partial compliance isn't enough, might demand full answers to specific questions, and then we're back to confrontation. If Trump completely defies the order, if the deadline passes with no compliance, Judge Boasberg has to decide whether to follow through on his threats. Does he actually hold Trump in contempt? Does he impose sanctions? Does he order imprisonment? Those would be unprecedented actions against a sitting president. They would create enormous political and constitutional controversy. Trump supporters would call it judicial tyranny. There would be protests, accusations of a coup. It would be chaos. But if the judge doesn't follow through, if he makes threats but doesn't act, that undermines judicial authority. It shows presidents can defy courts with no real consequences. So the judge is in a difficult position too. The most likely scenario, if Trump defies the order, Judge Boasberg finds him in contempt, issues an order saying Trump violated the court's directives, imposes some sanction, probably monetary fines, rather than imprisonment to start, and orders Trump to comply immediately or face escalating sanctions, including possible imprisonment. That keeps the pressure on without immediately creating a massive crisis. It gives Trump another chance to comply under even more serious threats, and it preserves the judge's credibility by showing he follows through on his warnings, while also showing restraint by not immediately ordering Trump jailed. But there's a scenario where this gets much more dramatic. If Trump completely refuses to comply and the judge decides to make an example, Judge Boasberg could order criminal contempt charges, could order Trump to appear for arraignment on contempt charges, could theoretically issue a warrant for Trump's arrest if he doesn't appear. That would be a full-blown constitutional crisis. Would Secret Service allow Trump to be arrested? Would the executive branch comply with the judicial warrant against the president? These are questions we've never had to answer in American history, and we might be about to find out. The political fallout from this confrontation will be intense regardless of the outcome. If Trump complies, his supporters will say he was forced to by a tyrannical judge. His opponents will say it proves even Trump has to follow the law. If Trump defies and faces contempt, his supporters will say it's persecution and judicial overreach. His opponents will say it's accountability for defying court orders. There's no outcome that doesn't create more political division, that doesn't further polarize the country. But that's where we are. Courts and the executive branch in open conflict with fundamental constitutional questions at stake. The bottom line? Judge Boasberg ordered Trump to testify or face contempt charges within 48 hours. That's an unprecedented ultimatum to a sitting president. It tests whether courts can enforce their authority against defiant executive branch officials. It forces Trump to choose between compliance and confrontation. And it sets up a potential constitutional crisis if Trump refuses and the judge follows through on contempt threats. This is judicial authority versus executive power in its rawest form, and the outcome will shape the relationship between these branches for years to come. We're about to find out if courts can really check presidential power or if their authority is just theoretical when presidents choose to defy them. Stay tuned, because the 48-hour clock is ticking, and Trump has to make a choice.